A special board meeting of the special meeting of the Board of Education at 7:02, and Mr. Gillen will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Will you all please rise?
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you, Ed. The roll call is we're all in our places except for Shoshana Huff, who has a very good reason for not being here, and happy birthday to Shoshana. Dr. Tarosian, do we have any public comments?
We do not.
Okay. Seeing and hearing none, we'll close and we'll move on to the informational reports. The reason why we have these special meetings every week when we're not having a regular school board meeting, so that the community can stay up to date on what is happening with distance education and where we're going. Dr. Tarosian, will you please give an update?
Thank you, President Hammond, members of the board. This evening, we have some special guests who will help us provide some in-depth information about what is going on with distance learning. First up, we have Mr. Tom McFadden, who tells a little bit about learning pods now that we have had them going for about a week. Mr. McFadden.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Tarosian and Board President Hammond, members of the board. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about the learning pods. We have been going for just over a week now with learning pods, and we're excited to have this gotten off the ground. So just a couple slides and some information on our learning pods. First of all, the enrollment in our pods as of yesterday stands at 88 students. We have staffing for 13 pods altogether, and there's a breakdown of the number of pods that we have staffing for. There's 2 pods at each site right now. In Monrovia has 3 pods as we look to fill these extra spaces over the next couple of days. As of yesterday, we had 29 students that had pending enrollments. Our maximum capacity at this point is 156 students amongst all these 13 pods. So we had 39 spaces left as of yesterday, and we continue to register and enroll students daily. We anticipate within the next couple of days to have a waiting list for the learning pods as the enrollments are starting to come in. Can you go to the next slide, Dr. Tarosian? Thank you. So there's 3 other updates that we want to give. First of all, on the learning pod cohorts, as a lot of things that come out of LA County Public Health Department, we receive guidances almost weekly that changes the narrative a little bit. So we received one on the 20th the other day about what to do in a cohort if someone tests positive. And so if someone tests positive in the cohort, everyone in that cohort, students and staff, must quarantine until cleared. And our medical staff, our health staff, would be the one involved with their clearance and liaisoning with what they need to do at home in their quarantine. So that's a little bit of a change from the prior guidance. But if we receive a positive case in the cohort, everybody's got to quarantine from that cohort. And then in structuring the learning pods, we ran into a rule called the 60-30 rule that says that expanded learning programs, which is what our program is with the Village program supported by the ACES grant, must apply for a child care license if we're going to operate over a certain amount of hours as a program, or students are going to be in the program over a certain amount of hours weekly, that's where the 60-30 is coming in. 60 hours a week for the program, operationally and 30 hours a week of attendance for the student themselves. So we constructed our pods with this variable in mind. And one of the reasons we are going from 815 to 215, which is right at the 30 hours per week mark for our students. The district we do have staff on the clock, though, starting at 8 a.m. And going until 3 p.m. to provide additional supervision for those students that need that. So we've been going for about a week now, and that part seems to be going pretty smoothly with the drop-offs and the pickups and all the procedures that we had to have in place for learning pods to be going in the first place. Along with the additional guidance that came out from LA County Public Health, additional guidance regarding the 60-30 rules and flexibilities in terms of servicing hours and background checks without having to require a license are going to get looked at by our team once we have settled on our current pod structure. So there might be some ways for us to be more flexible with that 60-30 rule, but we gotta have some time to settle on the pods as they're still in their infancy of us operating that program. So to get the learning pods off the ground, we've had a huge collaboration with many different folks in the district providing the learning pod support. On the ground level, we have 35 MUSD classified employees assigned to these pods for supervision. And the way we constructed that supervision was to include a role called the floater, and a floater supervisor in the pod is someone that would be able to help the classified staff have their breaks, watch kids to and from restrooms as they need to go to and from the restrooms, provide additional supervision on outside time, and act as our subs in case we need to have a sub, because the cohorting piece requires us to, as much as possible, keep the same adults in the same pods as we service these students in their distance learning. In addition to that, we have two, and Patrick Garcia has been in charge of these two pod specialists that's done a lot for the learning pod setups. They're two classified employees of ours. And then we've had one superintendent, two assistant superintendents, two directors, site-based administrative teams, our program manager from the village office staff, HR business services staff, and our health team all come together in different ways to provide a structure for these learning pods and for the students to come and be on our campus in a safe way. So there is a lot going on with the pods. It's been a lot to put together, and we're excited to have these students on our campuses. So do you all have any questions I can answer?
Any question of Tom? Brian?
Yes. Who put the 60-30 rule out?
The 60-30 rule is coming from the state of California. So it's a guidance that's is between the expanded learning division and the early child care division. And so what that guidance says is that if a expanded learning program operates more than 60 hours a week or 30 hours for the students, that we have to seek a child care license. And so
you had mentioned that since we're still in our first week, that you were looking for certain types of flexibilities. What type of flexibilities are you looking for that would alter this 60-30 rule?
So if we were to look at servicing students for longer than the 3 p.m. time, say we needed the need to come up to have a release time of 5 o'clock, for example, or 6 o'clock for the parents that are saying that they need longer amounts of supervision, we would have to seek out a waiver of the 60-30 rule to be able to service that need.
Do we have an extended after school program, a Village Online or Village Live that runs in conjunction with this?
Yeah, so we've condensed our Village Live offering because we've had several Village employees transition into the pods. And so we still have a Village Live program for those students and families that need it. And that goes until 5 o'clock, 5:15 every day.
So the Village Live is not part of the learning pods, or as far as the 60-30 rule is written.
Correct. That is correct. They operate separately and have separate staff.
So that's the distinguishing factor, is separate staff?
Yeah, so the staff that's working the Village Live program are not working the Village, not working in the learning pods.
Okay, that seems really sketchy. I mean, it's the same program, it's the same oversight, right? I mean, this was kind of the whole question between Village and learning pods, was as long as the people's job titles are the same, they're viewed the same.
Yeah, we were told by Expanded Learning Division that we can definitely use ACES staff to run learning pods, and we can also have existing staff that's not in learning pods run our virtual enrichment program, which we call Village Live.
Just want to make sure. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Vanessa?
Yes, thank you, President Hammond. And thank you, Mr. McFadden, for being here tonight and explaining a little more details. I'm not going to lie here. There's a few terms that I was not familiar with or had not read in previous board reports or anything like that. The pod floaters, can you explain that again to me?
Sure. So when it comes to the supervision of the pods, they're all classified employees. You know, they're district employees, they're the village employees, and so we've made a distinction between assigning an employee to a pod and assigning a person as a pod floater. The reason why we have pod floaters is to be able to have an infrastructure where we have coverage for supervision that arises out of the normal day. So, for example, if a kid is needing to use the restroom during their distance learning program and that pod is in the classroom, the floater would be able to supervise that student to and from the bathroom, or the late arrivals or their early leaves for the program. We also had to have a structure as we began to look at this to cover ourselves for substitutes. And so the pod floaters would be the ones who are already on campus serving in that capacity to fill in for employees that will be absent on any given day.
Certainly, I understand the need for it. And this is written into the guidance then provided by the LA Department of Health, where you could have pod floaters potentially having access to several different pods, especially on the school site you identified. If you go to a previous screen where it had the breakdown per school site, you have multiple, you had 3 learning pods at Monroe. So are you saying that those floaters would have access to all 3 of those learning pods?
Potentially. In the guidance that came out from LA County Public Health is very specific about the number of adults inside of a pod. But these would be, you know, quasi outside the pod as they're directing students more outside the confines of the classroom, the pod classroom.
Okay, so
And this is within the guidance. This is within the guidance of having the LA County Department of Public Health definitely identified substitutes as individuals we would need to have within the confines, and they understand that every pod would not have an assigned substitute for them. And so this is within the guidance. I think that was maybe your question. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So that clarifies that. Thank you. And the other thing, so you identified that 156 maximum student capacity for our learning pods, and that's for all the school sites we identified. You have currently 88 students enrolled with 29 pending. That leaves 39 remaining spaces. So if we go beyond those 39 spaces that are remaining, you said there would be a waiting list. Explain the process of the waiting list. When do you make the decision to create a new learning pod?
Well, right now, the 13 pods are the max that we have based on our current staffing. So working with Dr. Jackson, he may have some additional employees that are coming into the pods. And if that happens, then we'll be able to open up more spaces. If a waiting list is created, then the priority for those registrations would go to the priorities we identified earlier in terms of the priorities for registration. So there may be a situation where, families come into the pod, but they change their mind midstream and it opens up a space. And then we'd look to fill that space with those highest priorities that we've identified.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other, Celine?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up the pod floaters, Maritza. And I apologize for going back to it, but I'm not clear about it. My understanding of the guidance was 12 students, 2 adults. If anyone in the cohort stays the same, and if anyone in that cohort it tests positive for COVID, that whole cohort is quarantined. So if, as Maritza pointed out, we have a floater that's in 2 or 3 pods, cohorts, how is that still within the guidance? And what happens if they're in, do they cross-contaminate then? So if they're in, if it's pod A, B, and C, someone tests positive in C, this floater has been to A, B, and C, floating physically into A, B, and C. Do we quarantine those 3 pods then because of this floater?
Yeah, those are good questions. And we've been working with our health coach, Katrina, and Deneen, our nurses, on coming up and making sure people understand what the definition of a close contact is. So part of the definition of that is to be within 6 feet of someone with for more than 15 minutes. And so in the floater capacity, if that hasn't happened, they wouldn't be considered a close contact. So that would be one thing. Part of the guidance that we're working with is how many pods that an adult can be in a given time. So the guidance from LA County is 2 pods during the day, not more than 2 pods during the day.
So you're saying that a pod would have 1 adult and 1 floater?
We haven't identified a pod with a particular floater. We've let the floater, we haven't assigned floaters to a particular pod in a particular campus because we're still evaluating what the needs are at a given time with our staffing. So we need. So
does the pod have 2 adults in it now, or does it have 1 adult? Leaving
1 adult.
Space. Okay.
Yeah, there's only 1 adult at a time inside the classroom, inside of a pod classroom.
Okay. Okay. I had a second question, and I think maybe it's in your previous slide, but it was about siblings being in the same pod. Do you even see a situation? I'm looking at a scenario of maybe a kindergartner and a 6th grader or something like that, and having a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old in the same pod. Are you experiencing that yet? And if so, how is that working?
Yes, for sure. We do have kids ranging from kindergarten through 8th grade in these pods. And so we have families that do have siblings, and some are at middle school and some are at elementary school. And, the families indicate a preference for site. And if we can accommodate that, both of those kids from the same household have to be in the same pod. That's for sure. So we do have kids in the pod classrooms that range from, 8th grade to a 4th grader to, a 5th grader, et cetera. And so as the pod supervisors, we've been working with to help them understand how to best help with those students, because they're actually just supervising and facilitating their distance learning. They're not doing the teaching for those students. And so it's really just making sure that they have what they need in the classrooms to be able to pay attention to their teacher, which they're looking at virtually.
Thank you.
Brian, did you have a question?
I do. Do you have any information on Mayflower? How many students are there? How their program differs from our program at all?
The only information I know is that they go until 6 o'clock. I believe they go longer than our pods. But other than that, I do not have their information.
Do you have a feel for how the attendance has been for our pods?
So one of the things that we're going through tomorrow is, and this will help clear up some of those spaces too, is that we do have some families that signed up for the pods, enrolled for the pods, and were no-shows. So tomorrow I've asked our program manager to give me the finalized attendance numbers for this first week so that we can reach out. And we came up today in our task force meeting with some guidance that we're going to roll out to the families about attendance in the, so that we don't have kids on the waiting list that could be there every day of the week.
Right.
And have, kids that, go to the pods once a week or twice a week, et cetera. So.
Have we had an opportunity to see how the pods are working? As far as we know how we envision that they're going to work, that the kids are going to be a little bit more engaged, they're going to be a little bit more focused, that they have a supervisor to help with technical issues. Have we had any observations yet, or is it still just too new to see how the big picture is working?
Well, we're still in its infancy, a week away. But I can definitely tell you that one of the advantages that we're seeing is that in the reach out to for enrollment for the pods, we worked very closely with the site admin teams to have them identify their disengaged students and to help us get them enrolled into these pods. And so one of the advantages we're seeing is that these disengaged students that are in the pods are being visited in the pod classrooms, when the principals drop by or their site teachers drop by and check on these students, being socially safe and observing all that stuff, which is helping with the engagement for sure. I've heard feedback from both principals and teachers and families, as a matter of fact, about how the engagement has increased just by having those kids be on campus.
That's great. After you do your attendance check, if you could also let us know what the breakdown is from the different classifications of how many of the kids are homeless or foster care or engaged or social learners, English language, so we can get an idea of the kids that we're servicing and the needs that they have. That would be fantastic. Yeah,
we actually started that. Dr. Torsten, can you go back to the previous slide? We have some of that demographic information.
In fairness to Mr. McFadden, he had much of that information and I deleted it, but I'll provide that to you in an update. Some of the information would have simply been far too specific.
Sure.
To students. So I didn't want any identifiable information. Mr. McFadden, if you'd send me that chart again in entirety, and I will share it with the board, and that way no information identifiable regarding.
In the last question I had was kind of on that same line, which is, I know we have excess capacity, so we're taking everybody who would like to make use of the service, which is fantastic. But once we get to a waiting list, is there going to be any situation that you can think of in which we're going to bump a kid out who's already in it for a higher risk person? So if we have somebody who's doesn't meet any of the criteria and a homeless child finds out about it and wants to be put in it, clearly we don't want the highest needs to be on a waiting list, right? So how do we handle, or what's the thought of what we're going to do if that situation occurs?
Yeah, I think we discussed that a little bit today. One of the overarching, registration priorities has been for homeless, McKinney-Vento
Right.
students. And so when spaces open up, because of sporadic attendance, for example, we have the conversation with both families about, we have kids on the waiting list that need this program and can be here every day. And the families I've talked to that have already indicated that might be their situation are understanding so far of the need for a student that could be there every day to be placed in the pod. It becomes a premium spot. So
right.
It happens, then we're going to first go through our list of waitlist students and see who would qualify as a homeless foster youth and put them in that in that space first.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Tom, I do have a couple. Where possible, are students placed in their regular school pod, or are students being asked to attend a pod at a different school than the regular school?
Well, the answer to that question is yes and yes. We ask for their first choice of school, but it's based on space and availability. And so as pods have filled up, we may have we have space. But for example, Brad Oaks they're full with their 2 pods right now. So if a family, if a Brad Oaks family says, I'd like to go to the pod of Brad Oaks, but we don't have space there, then we'll have the conversation with them about, well, we do have X number of spaces at Wild Rose, we have X number of spaces at Clifton. So we'll start farming out based on where the spaces are available. So we do have some families that are not at their home school, but are in a pod.
Okay. And if you would do me a favor, and this is for the public's edification, walk me through the process from the time the parent brings the child to school. How does the student get into the pod and the activity that goes on through the day? I'm specifically talking about the safety features that we have in place.
So we've identified drop-off and pickup zones at every school. And so the family pulls up to the drop-off pickup zone. We've asked all families to be masked inside their car when they pull up. Pod staff will go through the health screening questions with the family about that child. Similar to our employee health screening, they have to have no's to the questions about, are you exposed to someone with COVID? Do you have these symptoms? If those questions are no, and we do a temperature check in the car. If all that is good, then the student exits the car. They go with the pod supervisor, and they're escorted or supervised into their pod classroom. The families at no time exit the car. We keep the families in the car, and they drive off to their day. And then at sign out time, we do the same process, just bringing the kids from the classroom to the cars. Our staff identifies the pickup person. They have to be on our list for sign out. And then we allow that child to be with that picking up adult.
Thank you very much. I've been sitting here debating about bringing this up. I'm just going to do it because this is pretty serious things that we're doing. I think the term floater may be a bad term to use. Let's see if we can find something else.
Sure.
My inner 13-year-old has a very good time with that, particularly when you talk about contamination. Okay. So let's find a different term because it's pretty serious.
Okay.
Any other questions of Tom? Thanks, Tom.
Sure, no problem.
And next we have information regarding our English learners. This is one of our specialized cohorts and how we have been supporting them primarily with Paula Mariscal and Delma Cardinal. They have been extraordinary in their commitment to our English learners. And so I'll turn it over to them. And just let me know when you want me to forward the slides.
Pauline, you need to unmute yourself.
Well, that's a problem my husband has had for many years, but thank you, President Hammond, for bringing that to my attention. First of all, it's an honor to speak with you. I'm very happy and honored to be with us this evening and to report that my team and I, who consists of Delma Cardinal, who heads up the dual language TOSA component of our team, Brian Illarigi and Stacy Wilkins. The four of us have worked diligently to address the needs of our English language learners and potential English language learners as mandated by the California Department of Education. And we take our roles very seriously, and we are committed to the children and the safety of the children of Monrovia. We have been working over the past 6 weeks, and we have been mandated by the California Department of Health to meet all of the mandates put upon us regarding health screenings, including temperature checks and a variety of health screening questions for the students who have come to us, and we have met face-to-face with over 100 students of Monrovia. And I'm happy to report that in tracking all of our students, we have not come across any health issues related to COVID-19, thank goodness. And I'm happy to invite Delma Cardinal to comment on how the first piece of our testing went. Delma?
Hi, thank you very much for having us here tonight. We did begin with the initial English language proficiency assessments, and so those are the LPAC, and that is primarily used to identify which students that are new to our district, to California, to our country, students who have never been in a public school in California before. So we want to identify whether or not they need additional services as English language learners. So this test is just to assess that. Out of 100 students, we were able to assess 100 of them. We do still have 7 more that we are hoping we'll be able to assess. We identified 69 as English learners, and 31 were identified as initially fluent. So they will not be receiving services for English language learners. I think that's what I have there. Do you want to continue with this one, Paula?
Yes. Good. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Okay, so because of COVID-19, as we all know, we had our school closures. In Monrovia Unified, we were only able to assess per our schedule that had been approved and discussed with all site administrators. We were only able to assess students who attended 3 elementaries. Then the school closures happened, and so we were left with 2 elementaries that were unable to be assessed. Our 2 middle schools, our comprehensive high school, and then, of course, Canyon was not able to be assessed either. So out of that, following CDE guidelines and LACO, Los Angeles County of Education, their guidelines, we identified 23 English language learner students who were able to take the summative LPAC that was originally scheduled for the spring, but they could not take it because of the school closures. And so we have been in contact with them, and we were able to assess them one-on-one, face-to-face, and our results are pending. So we are hoping that those 23 students are able to reclassify and able to move on as English proficient students. Questions, comments?
Any questions? Celine?
Thank you, and thank you so much for what you are all doing. I had a question. If you could go back a slide. Yes, thank you. Mrs. Cardinal, you said 31 were identified as initially fluent English proficient. So can you explain this for me? Because I want to know if there are 31 students that you are working with. My thought is that they are not strong English speakers. because there's a question about their fluency. So explain to me why these 31 students are being assessed and how it is that they got reassigned as proficient.
Well, the way we identify these students is when students enroll in our schools for the first time, they have to fill out a home language survey. So these are new students to Monrovia. We've never worked with them before this school year. So from those students, we have to determine whether or not they will need additional help with English. So
Okay.
yeah, so that's how those 31, when we test them, it's really screening to see, are you fluent in English, so you do not need any support, or do you need additional support? So those 31, they were initially fluent and do not require additional support.
Wonderful. Thank you for clearing that up for me. I appreciate it.
Any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Marissa, I didn't see your hand.
Sorry. And I just want to clarify. So we have 31 that were identified initially fluent English proficient. We're not going to need to provide services. So the next slide then talks about 23 English language learner students were able to take. Okay. So what's the difference between those 31 and then these 23 that you identify on this slide?
The original slide, those are those are students who are new to our school system, to the district. The 23 on the other slide, those are our existing students. Normally we would have assessed them in the spring, but because of school closures, we were unable to assess them.
Okay, so they were already ongoing students. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Correct.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yes, and just to clarify further, those 23 students who were identified, board member Travanti, they had already met all the other criteria per the state as meeting the criteria for reclassifying. The only piece they needed was that one state assessment. That's how they were identified. We run queries through our database, our SIS, Student Identification System, and they met all the other criteria. The only thing they had not passed previously, or proved proficient, if you will, was that state assessment of the LPAC.
Now, do we have the numbers for those ongoing Monrovia Unified students that have not met proficiency and did not take the LPAC exam that you're referring to?
Yes, so what we did is we ran a series of questionnaires, if you will, through the database. We identified all students who had met proficient and advanced on the state assessment. And then we have local LEA or district assessments that the filters. So they had to first pass all of, when we identified the 23, all the district filters, and then the only filter that kept them, if you will, was the state assessment. So we do know the students who are on the cusp, and we are focusing our energies on those students once this next 15 to 30 days passes. Obviously, the teachers all know who these students are who are on the cusp of meeting that threshold. So we are focusing our efforts on those students so that they can bump through and go into the next, if you will, meet that next threshold.
Well, thank you so much for your work on this. This is very, very important to me, as I'm sure every board member here. We really want to make sure that we're servicing the English learners and moving them up into proficiency. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I must say, as an educator in this district for more than 20 years, it's been my lifelong passion to serve the needs of English language learners. And my team is dedicated to meeting them and rising above COVID-19 or whatever else the universe throws at us. So thank you. And I appreciate the time to be able to address you. Thank you so much. And thank you, President Hammond, for allowing us this time. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you guys taking your evening and being a part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And we really are fortunate to have Delma and Paula part of our team. They are passionate, and they were beside themselves when we were unable to assess our students in the spring. And we kept trying to find alternatives and ways in order to do so safely, because we all recognize how important this is. A couple of, actually just a few updates from the LA County Department of Public Health. I listened in, we had an update today from the LA County Department of Public Health. This may or may not be in writing yet, but it will be shortly. That ACT, SAT testing on sites will now be permissible as long as cohorting and safety protocols are followed. If you recall, with bus transportation, it was, the guidance was 1 student on every other seat as a best practice. That remains the best practice, but 1 student in every row is now permissible. The capacity of specialized services for instruction with small group cohorts, that's with special education and with English learners, has been increased from 10% to 25% of a school's population. So that capacity was just increased. And the waiver requirement for a TK to grade 2 in order to open up in a hybrid manner, if all other indicators are appropriate. The waiver requirement now requires consultation with unions and teacher and parent organizations, not letters of support. So just a slight difference, but certainly the nuance is not lost on the capacity.
Wow.
So the 6, oh, go ahead, Brian.
I could see how we would consult with the unions. That seems to be pretty easy. But how do we define consulting with parent groups? Is that we meet with each PTA, or is there any kind of definition as to what that means?
Yes, the waivers are school specific. And so the PTAs would be school specific.
Okay, thank you.
Is it also school site council or is it either or both?
It's unclear. My guess is in Monrovia, we would probably speak to everybody. There would be no, it just in a matter of transparency, getting feedback is pretty much what we try to do anyway.
Well, this is further proof that things change rapidly in this environment that we're in. It'd be rapidly day to day. This is some new information for me. I don't know if any of you knew of these changes. I am happy to hear about not needing the letters of support. Obviously, we want to consult, we want to talk, we want to speak, we want to come to the table with the unions and the parent groups. But the requirement of the letter of support was keeping public education or public schools from applying, as opposed to some of the announcements recently of private schools receiving the waiver. So I really do feel this puts us in a better posture for that. So I'm really happy to hear this news.
Maritza, this came out this afternoon at about 2 o'clock.
Ah, okay. I've been a little bit busy.
You still can't touch it. It's still wet.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Anything else, Dr. Tarosian?
Yes, simply just with our next steps. Again, we are working on establishing specialized cohorts for our special education students and our English learners. We will be finalizing the school-specific COVID exposure management plans, which are necessary for any waiver requirement. We'll continue updating the appropriate board policies. And the hybrid learning model has not come to its final shape. The subcommittees, the task forces at the elementary and secondary level have reconvened and really need to spend some serious time looking through the different models. We have looking at models in Orange County and San Diego counties where schools have opened up to see what's worked, what hasn't, and to really learn from our colleagues who are just a little further ahead of us in terms of the process. And once we finalize that, we'll need to get some additional information and probably survey our parents one more time, and then present the information to the board for approval. And one final announcement, and that will come from Connie Wu.
Good evening, Board President Mr. Hammond, Board of Education.
Am I muted? Dr.
No, you're not.
Drosing, before Ms. Wu starts, can I ask a question?
Certainly.
Dr. Thorosian?
Okay.
I heard today that Riverside County just moved back up into the purple tier. If we move to a hybrid model, when we move to another tier, lower tier, does part of our plan include what would happen, or do we know what would happen if we went from purple to red and then back into purple?
You know, it's interesting. The guidance talks about how schools will be reopened. They don't talk about closing schools again and when moving from tier to tier. What we are prepared for, though, is if there's an outbreak in any school, let's say in TK2, were we to open in a hybrid manner, our students would be cohorted. And if a student were to test positive, then depending upon the circumstances, certainly, but likely the contact tracing would begin, and the students in the classroom would all be informed. And so they, just as Mr. McFadden talked about closing the pod if there's a positive case, that too is what we would likely be doing and communicating to our families about potential exposure.
Okay, so I'm looking at not just the TK through second smaller cohorts. I'm looking at when we go to a hybrid model and we open it more. So it sounds like there's not yet a consideration about that. Is that correct?
When we are able to open, and let's say we get to the red tier, and we're able to open in a hybrid manner with X percentage of our students on campus. Again, before doing that, we need to finalize what our hybrid model will look like. And that means getting some information from parents. But what we will be prepared to do is close groups and classes and reopen them. We are preparing now to be able to do that.
Okay. Thank you for letting me interrupt you, Connie. And thank you, Doctor, for walking me through that question a little bit more.
Okay, Connie.
Okay, good evening, Board of Education, cabinet, staff, community members. Last week, the LA County Department of Public Health shared that due to the COVID-19, this year's Halloween will be very different. Trick-or-treat will not be encouraged and activity will be limited. However, the Business Service Department, school site principal, and PTAs, we will work together, try to bring some holiday spirit to our children in the communities. So Halloween this year will be the Saturday, and the Friday before it is October 30. Based on our district calendar, it is the staff PD day as well as the pupil free day. So the last school day will be October 29th. On that day, there will be two events will be happen at the same time. And for our department, the district child nutrition program, we will serve 2 days email on October 29th, which is for the Thursday and Friday. And all the meal serve area will be decorated with Halloween themes. And the service time will be extended from 7:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. instead of regular time, which is the end of 11:30 a.m. So every serving area, we have 2 tables. One table is our food meal will be offered, and other table will be called a special Halloween treat table. It will be hosted by PTA or other side non-cafeteria staff. So the treat will be given from 11:30 to 1 p.m. and only to the children who were accustomed to come up to prepare a meal. The 2 middle school, their schedule may be a little bit different from others. So we will adjust the time accordingly based on their schedule. So for the parents who pick up the meal earlier for their children, if their children were accustomed the only time, the time during the lunchtime, they will only pick up a tray. We cannot serve the 2 double meal for the same kids. So facial mask will be required at any time. It can be used as part of custom and be creative. So any person, organization in the community want to be part of this event to bring some joy to our community's kids, or would like to donate some items such as instructional supplies, because this year's trade will not only hand out candy. Candy is part of tradition. We also hand out some instructional material for kids to use on the distance learning. So any organization, person want to donate, please contact our school side, PTA, principal, or cafeteria managers. So that is the very exciting event, and we are looking forward. If any of the board member, if you have time on that day, you want to join us, and we will see you at each school site from 11:30 to 1 o'clock.
Thank you, Connie. Any questions of Connie? Thanks, Connie.
I just have a comment, if I can.
Sure.
Connie, thank you for this. And, you know, your job is so hard when it's not COVID. And now with COVID, you know, you have so many things to think about. And I think it's just wonderful that you went outside of your normal thinking and wanted to do something really special for the kids. I mean, in terms of like, you know, the business department, you're really thinking about the kids and really thinking about the community. And I want to thank you so much for doing that and for thinking about all of that. And I also want to give a shout out to all of the PTA volunteers, because I know how hard they work. As a small amount of people do a huge amount of work, and all of you working together to do this is a special treat for our kids. And I just want to thank you, Connie, and I want to thank all of the PTA volunteers who are working to do this. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Dr. Tarosian.
And that concludes our report for today.
Anybody have any questions or comments? Dr. Tarosian? Maritza?
It wasn't necessarily about this report out, but I did want to say a few words about the State of the Schools address that premiered last night. I want to thank Dr. Tarosian and all the cabinet members and staff that worked on that, and VMA. I was very proud of us and the product that we put out to the public. So if you haven't watched it, if you didn't get a chance last night, it's okay. It's on the YouTube channel. It's available. Please do watch it. There's a lot of great information on there. So shameless plug, I guess.
Anything else? I'm going to close our special meeting tonight on a special person. But before I do that, I want to thank Dr. Tarosian again and the entire staff at MUSD. The public probably doesn't know this, but Dr. Tarosian has been at the helm every day, except for, I think, 5 days since this pandemic started back in March. You puts in long hours. And the reason I know that is because I get text messages or emails at 1 o'clock in the morning as she is throwing things out for the next day's preparation. This is a person who cares deeply about what's happening here in this school district. And I want to make sure that, yes, it's a job, but I am full of gratitude for the job that you do. And I know the board is full of gratitude. We do not want you to do this at the risk of your own health. There is a life outside of school. And I'm building up to one thing, is that we've been running weekly meetings, which only adds to the amount of work that we have asked our staff to do so that we can keep the public informed about what's going on. We have a regularly scheduled meeting next Wednesday on the 28th. We will not have a special meeting the following week. Our hopes is our staff can take a breather for a second. We'll come right back at it with a regular school board meeting the following Wednesday, but hoping that the interim will be a break where we can catch up on work that has to get caught up on, maybe just take a break, maybe take a little bit time off from the weekend. But Kathy, I wanted to tell you, the work you have done did not go unnoticed, and it is very, very much appreciated. You've been stellar during this whole thing. Thank you.
It's very kind. I'm blessed with an extraordinary team, many of whom spoke this evening, and all of whom are either watching or contributing to our kids. Everybody is committed to seeing us through this crisis. We are the children of Monrovia, are blessed with great educators.
Well, I for one, and I know I speak for the board, we are happy that we have you here, especially during this critical time.
And for the record, I never texted you at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Well, there wasn't a text. It was probably an email that you sent out.
That I might have done.
And the other, we lost a wonderful person in our school district yesterday. Susan Hirsch passed away, and the mark that she left on our district will be indelible. We will have a proper closing in her memory at our regularly scheduled meeting next Wednesday, but we did not want to miss an opportunity to say how sad we are, how much we're going to miss her, and that we hope perpetual light shines upon her in infinity. And if there's no further business before this body, we will stand adjourned at 7:59. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.